Alright, so today is going to be a bit different of a video. I know the last couple of videos are mostly lighthearted and just looking at the game. But today I wanted to share some concerns that a lot of players have right now about the current state of the game. Just to start off, to give an example of what I mean, let's take a look at the top decks that are in the game right now. This will illustrate pretty well what's going on. If you just take a look here and you can count the number of units that are actually in each deck as opposed to the upgrades and spells and enhancements, you can see that usually it is very rare that there are more units than spells or enhancements in a deck, and how I personally feel is that that's not right for what this kind of game is meant to be. Stick War, as I've played it throughout all of its renditions. I played it since about 6 or 7 years ago when I first started playing the original Flash game. Stick War has always been a game about the units. All kinds of cool units that developers have made up over the years. The Swordwrath, the Archidons, the Merrics, Giants, the Speartons, the Shadowwrath, and then the Chaos units are also really cool as well, though there aren't as many in this game right now. Just mostly the Toxic Deads, the Eclipsers, Giants. That's what I feel like is the main attraction to what this game, to what the series is, are those units. And when you add a bunch of spells, enhancements, and stuff like that, that's not a bad addition to the game. But when you add them to the extent where they are detracting from what I believe is, again, the main attraction of the Stick War series, that doesn't really bode well for the multiplayer scene. Getting on to that multiplayer scene, Ace Player and I were discussing this for quite a while a couple of days ago, and one of the things that we agreed on is that a lot of the stuff like spells and enhancements take almost no effort at all to give a massive benefit to your side of a battle. Just for example, Mass Heal, all you have to do is click it, all your light units instantly get 100 health over about 6 seconds. That's a massive advantage if you're in a clash with your opponent, they don't have Mass Heal and you do. You're pretty much guaranteed to win that confrontation unless they retreat. Same thing with Projectile Barrier and Snow Squall, is that it can stop your enemies in their tracks in which they're unable to do damage to you, and you can do damage back to them, which again, pretty one-sided. And that kind of goes into another thing that we were talking about, is that the current scene of this Stick War 3 multiplayer really feels like it has more of a single-player approach than it does a multiplayer approach. What we mean by this is when we take a look at these spells and enhancements and upgrades, look, they're awesome, okay? I think the devs have done a great job creatively adding these as new additions to the game that we haven't seen before. We haven't had anything like this before in previous games, with the exception of maybe some Stick War Legacy spells. They're very fun to use and very effective at what they do, but they're far beyond the point where they're becoming too effective, and there is little to nothing that can be done about them for the other side of a match, except to bring their own set of spells. And that encourages a spell and enhancement heavy meta that detracts from what the game is meant to be, which I said earlier is these units right here. This is the heart and soul of Stick War. And continue on what I was saying earlier, I think this game has great potential. The developers have put a lot of thought into what to put into this, and although some of them right now aren't working the best, in the opinion of the community, I still think they're great additions to the series as a whole, and they just need to be reworked a bit. It's like This game has all the pieces of a great multiplayer game. It's just they haven't been fit together yet. It's how do we get spells, enhancements, upgrades, and units together in a way that lets them blend together instead of standing out so separately from one another like they are right now. Like, the beauty in my eyes of what Stick Empires was is that everything really tied together. Those upgrades you had, most of them directly went into the unit's abilities instead of being their own separate thing, and that put more emphasis on the units themselves having control over the battlefield. And that's again what I feel what this game is supposed to be about. It's about the units that you put on there. It's about the Sword Wrath, it's about the Archons, the Shadow Wrath, the Merrics, the Spiritans. That's what Stick War is about. It's not about the Snow Squall or the Mass Heal or even like Vault of Prudence or Blazing Bolts. It's about the units, and that's what the focus of it needs to be more on. Lastly here, I want to address the upgrades that we have right now, which I think are more integral to the game as a whole than the spells or enhancements. We've seen them in aside from the unit upgrades that we've had in the original Stick War and Stick War Legacy. These are more reminiscent of the Stick War 2 Stick Empires era of upgrades. They're basically what the spells could be right now, but they aren't, is they should be utilities to help enhance your army, or just give basically a slight advantage or edge over your opponent in a given situation. Some of these actually do pretty fine with that. Miner Hustle increases your miner's health and mining speed, which is great for your economy, and it doesn't really negatively impact your opponent in any way. Same thing with the miner wall that we have. It's a blockade that your opponent has to get past, but it doesn't directly impair their army or does anything detrimental to their units. On the other hand, we have upgrades like Toxic Totality, which add poison damage to all chaos units. Now, it's a great idea in theory, but the issue is with this is that it can also be for just 100 gold and 100 mana. It can be a very strong advantage to have early in the game that really puts your opponent like behind the 8-ball, because you have to force. Again, like same issue with the blazing or voltaic projectiles, is you have to force your opponent to garrison or lose those miners, and even while garrison, they're not making any gold for their economy. That really makes an unfair advantage for one side, and that also gets into another thing that Aze and I talked about. The game really kind of promotes with the user control, which with the user control is again a very controversial topic, very fun to use, but if your opponent's very good at using user control, it really puts you at a disadvantage, and it's not very fun to deal with if they're cheesing out your units and taking advantage of your unit's AI with their player-controlled unit. So there's been a lot of discussion about this. Should we remove it entirely? Should we nerf it to a degree? I personally think that, at least in like the competitive multiplayer scene, it doesn't really have much of a place there. In a multiplayer RTS game, everything should remain consistent, and that user control is an element of inconsistency that can really screw up matches from how they would otherwise go. Overall, I think this game can go very far. It might be one of the best in the entire series. It just needs a lot of work right now. That's the concern I really wanted to voice out there. Is it's got a lot of cool stuff. Got stuff that's going to bring in new players, going to keep old players around, but we also have stuff in here that's going to drive some of our players away, and we don't want that. At this point in the video, I have discussed a lot of what's not working with the game right now, and personally, I don't think there would be much of a point to this video if I didn't also share how we might be able to possibly improve this game, or at least get it headed into a better direction than what it is right now. For one of those things that I feel pretty strongly about is the current spell system in the game that we have right here. The spells work a lot differently from the units in the sense that, with the exception of our generals that we have, all the units share a single Q, which in my opinion prevents a lot of spamming and otherwise very, basically some very broken strategies that you can use. One of the examples was when briefly a separate minor queue was added into the beta. That got removed very quickly for obvious reasons, because everyone would just spam miners along with whatever else they were building for their army and using them outside of their intended purpose. But spells, on the other hand, spells, you can use all of these at the same time, provided that you have enough mana in your deck. And that's where I think spells become too powerful and too influential in the match, is you can use all of them whenever you want, as long as they are available and not during cooldown. And that can really heavily impact different clashes between units, regardless of the size of one force versus the size of another. And that's fundamentally wrong for a real-time strategy game. It takes away from the strategy of a strategy game, and that is, my eyes, just a really big problem. As a way to address this, I've discussed a couple of options. One of the ones I really liked was similar to units giving a shared queue for all the spells. So even if you put 2 or 3 spells in your deck, you can only use one at a time, and you actually have to tactically choose which spell gives the most benefit in a given situation. I feel like that would add more utility and less overall benefit to the spells that we have in the current system right now. Another thing is with the enhancements that I don't agree with is they're completely free. All I have to do is just add them right here, and just like that, I have it in my deck. I have an immediate advantage over my opponent just right at the start of the game for my ranged units. Do the same with freaking Vampiric. I have an advantage over my opponent who, if they do not have this. And I feel like having that advantage at like no cost to you is a pretty big downside for your opponent, and another part of the single player approach that the multiplayer kind of is looking like right now. There needs to be a way to make enhancements less viable, or at least have some sort of drawback to their advantages that they have. A's player has discussed making blazing bolts and other stuff like this apply some of their own status effects to the units using them. It's not something I was entirely thrilled about, to be honest. Pretty sure it's not a bad idea, it's just personally I don't like it. Something I would do instead was to add a toggle for these different enhancements where they work for all your units, except they have an active cost to maintain it, so you can't abuse them at the early start of a game, because nobody likes losing their first 5 or so miners to like some blazing voltaic archidons that chip away at their health and force you to garrison, preventing you from getting any gold to deal with your opponent. That's a pretty big issue. I would just like to close this video by saying that I congratulate the developers for undertaking this massive project. This is probably one of the most ambitious projects they've ever worked on. I mean, just look at the variety of stuff we have here. This is nothing like we've seen before in any of the games prior. I have the highest hopes for the developers to make this an enjoyable multiplayer scene for all parties, regardless of if one person's winning or another person is losing. Because that's, I think, another thing that's important in a lot of multiplayer games is if you're only having fun when you're winning, what's the point? Because no one's going to be winning 100% of the time. And losing shouldn't be so unbearable through various reasons that you don't want to play the game anymore. How do we make losing fun, or at the very least tolerable for our players? Because no one wants to lose right now to opponent because their army got freezed up by Snow Squall and they immediately lost that army and got their statue crushed. No one wants that. What people want are competitive, strategy-based matches that rely on unit tactics, resource management, time management, that kind of stuff that requires actual thought and skill, and is what really should be determining the outcome of these matches. That will create a healthier multiplayer scene, and it's only going to draw on more players as a result. I hope to see more for this game soon in the future. Maybe some stuff with this will be fixed, maybe not, but I can only hope for the best, and hopefully some of you guys agree with me as well. Sorry if the audio quality was a bit janky at times. I'm still getting used to recording. I'll see if I can make that a little more smooth in the future, but if you have any ideas you wanted to share, or if there was anything you agreed with or disagreed with, you can feel free to leave something down in the comments below, and hopefully we'll get a better game by the time it's released. Thank all you guys for watching.